funding our webinar. In this particular webinar, we should be able to engage as the Red Cross Red Crescent and see how we will be able to prepare in advance for the upcoming El Nino together with its impact. I just want to take you through a few housekeeping rules. As I've said, we'll be recording this session for sharing with colleagues who will not be able to join this meeting, so please be aware about that. As I mentioned before, we have translation available. So on the bottom right of your screen, there's a globe icon. Please click on that and select the language of your choice. We'll be having translation to French, to English, and Portuguese. Please remain muted if you're not speaking so that we can have a smooth flow of the session at all time. And I'll also request you to be an active participant. And with that, I want to also ask you to please let us know from which national society you're joining, which part of Africa you are joining, so that we can be able to see how much this webinar was able to cover. I just want to take us through the agenda for today. So we'll be having a 2-hour webinar session. We promise that you're going to keep it as lively as possible throughout the two hours. So right now we are just having the welcome and introductions to this particular webinar. We will thereafter move to the aims and the objectives of this webinar, where our head of the disaster and crisis at the IFRC Africa office will just be making very brief remarks on why we need to prepare for the upcoming El Nino. And then we'd have our colleagues from the Climate Center taking us through the El Nino. What is it? What is it about? What impact should we expect? And then our colleague Dagem will take us through the risk and vulnerability analysis as well as country prioritization. And again, after that, we will be able to see how different persons are preparing for the El Nino. So we'd have experiences from both the Red Cross Red Crescent, but also as it is said, you need to test other food so that you know that your mother's cooking is not only the best. And so we have invited our colleagues from the WFP as well as FAO to share their experiences. And then after that, we'll be able to see practically what can we do to prepare for this particular phenomena. And after that, we should be able to close. So without further ado, I want to take this opportunity to invite Matt. Matt, I don't know if you can hear me. Please just unmute, open your video and make some brief remarks. Over.
Thanks, Phoebe. Hope you can hear me okay.
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Thanks very much, and good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to those that are further west. First, thanks very much for joining. It's great to see we have already over 80 people connected on the line, and that I think demonstrates the high level of interest and the importance of the conversation for today. And I'm sure that we'll have others joining throughout the meeting as well. Great to see that we have colleagues from national societies across the region, from West Coast, from the Southern Africa region, and here in East Africa as well. First, thanks very much to the team that have led on the preparation and the delivery of this session. I think it's really great to see that we're trying to be as anticipatory as we can be, and making sure that we're preparing solid, strong early actions towards, excuse me, the forecast that we have for El Nino, and drawing upon good experience from within the Red Cross and Red Crescent to previous El Nino events, but also drawing upon experience, as you've said, Phoebe, from partners as well today. I really look forward to the conversation, and especially the questions and sharing of experience and in the discussion time today. As we all know, there's a very strong prediction for El Nino through October, November, December of 2023, which will have varying impacts across the region. Areas of obviously increased rainfall, largely in the east and Horn of Africa, but also areas of suppressed and reduced rainfalls as well. So we, across national societies and support with partners, will be looking at different varied both risks analysis, and the preparations for anticipatory and early action to that strong prediction, both in terms of flood risk, impacts on growing seasons, looking at suppressed rainfall areas as well as the opportunities that may exist where there is an increased rainfall, as well as the risk of flooding as well. Today we'll share some analysis, as Phoebe has mentioned, but I think even more importantly hear from national societies and from partners in terms of experience and in terms of early preparation and early actions. So I'm not going to go over what we're going to hear from the different presenters, only to say, yeah, thanks very much, and really to the team that have put this together. I think it's really hopefully a very useful session in advancing our preparedness, and really also, to both with the Climate Centre, with other partners supporting, trying to increase and supplement the national, sub-regional and cluster analysis and foresight from the regional level as well. So back to you, Phoebe, and again, thanks very much for joining everyone. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Matt, for those remarks, and really emphasizing the need that we need to prepare and prepare in advance of the event itself. Great. Thank you very much. I think at this time I will hand over to Damoda to take us through the next sessions. Damoda, can you hear me?
Yes, Phoebe. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Yeah. Thank you, Phoebe. Thank you, Matt, for your opening remarks and inspiring note on this webinar. Colleagues, as you know, we will now try to dive into the technical matters of the subject focus of today's webinar. Let me assure you, we have very interesting and very comprehensive sessions today. And to start with, let me invite Gigma from Climate Center. Gigma is the climate scientist at the Climate Center, and in 10 minutes of this time, he will be sharing with us on Nino, basically on what and hows of this climatic phenomena. And he will also touching base on the Indian Ocean dipole that reinforces the El Nino conditions in African region. Thank you, Gigma, so much for your time. The floor is yours for 10 minutes. Colleagues, let me inform in the meantime, please make use of the chat box to post your questions. Gigma, over to you for 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. I hope you can see and hear me. I'm seated with the game. Hi, everyone. So we are attending a workshop on anticipatory action in Burkina Faso. So I'm going to basically elaborate a little bit about what El Nino is and what impacts we should expect from this year's El Nino. So maybe next slide, please. So the next slide, we know that, and we can go, yeah, next slide. Okay, while it comes, I think I can say that we know that the Pacific Ocean is the biggest ocean in the world. So all the land masses put together of the continents, all the continents across the earth, the global phenomenon that is taking place mainly in the Pacific Ocean, but as a result of let's say the size of the ocean, as well as the capacity of the waters from that ocean to absorb and later on release energy, it is affecting all the regions in the world. So in terms of history, it started with a couple of fishermen across the Latin America, let's say, coast. For some years, they were observing that there was some kind of fish that were coming towards Christmas time, and they said that this could have been a gift from the child Jesus. And the child in Portuguese, which is the most spoken language in this, in Spanish rather, in this region, is basically El Nino, and that is how it started. Now let's go to the next slide to have a more scientific approach about it. So I was saying that next slide, please. Next slide. Can you hear me?
Yes, Quick, I've already changed. Let me just try and reshare again. Meanwhile, you can please
Oh,
continue.
great, great, great. It has come now. So in the Pacific Ocean, the winds are generally moving from east to west. That is from, let's say, the Southern America coast towards Australia and Indonesia. So this is the general circulation. And as the wind goes from this Latin America towards Indonesia, it actually drags some heat. And in normal situation, we'll have the coast of Indonesia being relatively warmer, whereas the coast of South America is relatively cooler. What will happen during El Nino? And we can go to the next slide. Next, yeah. Okay, great. So what will happen during La Nina conditions first? It is that this circulation will be kind of strengthened. So the winds are going to become extremely strong, and this will result in the Australia and Indonesia and all the regions near there kind of overheating. Whereas on the other hand, in Southern America, you are going to have a sort of overcooling of the ocean. And in terms of anomaly, therefore, we'll see that this place in towards Australia and Indonesia is much warmer than usual, both the waters and the atmosphere. Whereas in towards Southern America, it is quite the opposite. We are having very cool waters as well as a cool atmosphere in that place. Let's move on to the next slide. During the reverse conditions, it's still coming. Yeah, so during the reverse conditions, actually, the winds are going to become very, very weak. So we even have instances where instead of flowing from Southern America towards Australia, it is going to take the opposite direction. It will actually flow from Australia towards Southern America. And as a result, the patterns that we are seeing are going to be reversed. This means that we'll observe a cooler than normal situation in the west, that is towards Australia, Indonesia, etc., the Philippines, etc. Whereas in the coast of Southern America, we will see a much warmer than usual situation. And you see that this is like an oscillation between these two coasts of the Pacific Ocean. That is actually where the name El Nino and Sudden Oscillation comes from. Actually, it is an oscillation that takes place mainly in the southern half of the Pacific Ocean. That is why we call it a sudden oscillation. And then we have the El Nino phenomenon, which is often reversed by the La Nina situation. And that is what make up what we call El Nino and sudden oscillation. So concretely then, what are the implications for that? Can we go to the next slide, please? Great. So as I was saying, actually, when you say El Nino, it basically means that we have much warmer conditions towards Indonesia, whereas when we have La Nina, it is something much cooler. To characterize, therefore, this El Nino and La Nina, scientists have just used the observations of sea surface temperatures in the oceans above, in the Pacific Ocean. So what they do is when they see that the observed temperatures of the sea are relatively higher than the normal range, they will say that we are in a El Nino condition, and reversely, they will say that we are in a La Nina situation. And they have set up some thresholds from which they will declare that El Nino is ongoing. And this is basically when we have an anomaly of up to 0.5 degrees Celsius. When this is on a negative sign, that is when you have an anomaly of minus 0.5 or less than that, they will say that this is a La Nina condition. And you will see that there is a sort of cycle actually between El Nino and La Nina throughout the time. This is a time series from January 1982 to January of last year. And you see how some El Nino events happen. And of course, you would understand that the higher the magnitude of the anomaly, Therefore, the stronger the impacts that this El Nino is going to have. Next slide, please. So what are the impacts of El Nino? I'm just going to focus on Africa because this is the focus of this meeting. So when there is El Nino ongoing in the Pacific Ocean, I told you that there are impacts across the world. For us in Africa, what we'll see is, starting from the north towards the south, is in the Sahel, the West African Sahel region, where we have a single rainy season taking place from July to September every year. When there is a El Nino situation, this rainy season could actually fail because the rains are going to be less than what is usually expected. Moving downward, when we go to Eastern Africa, we'll see that El Nino strongly affects what they call the short rain season. That is the second rainy season of the year in the region. And when there is El Nino, it typically goes with increased rainfall in the region. This could lead to some even flooding if the El Nino situation is, let's say, strong, for example. And down in Southern Africa, we'll see that during the March, the relatively 6-month-long rainy season that they have in that place, when there is El Nino, it is associated with relatively severe drought in the region. And I can give you a couple of examples of what happened in previous years. For example, in the Sahel, in the years 1982, 1983, we had what we call the Great Drought that led to several disasters in the region. In Eastern Africa, back in 2018, 2019, for example, we had lots and lots of flooding. And in Southern Africa, in 2015, 2016, you also observed a relatively big drought there. You can go to the next slide, please. Yeah. One thing to notice is that, of course, we are talking about El Nino. Everyone is talking about El Nino, but El Nino itself is not enough. In addition to El Nino, we have other drivers affecting our region. Let's go to the next slide. I will present you another one which is particularly relevant for us this year. Next slide, please. Great. So we have the Indian Ocean dipole. This is exactly as what I was describing in the Pacific Ocean. Just take what I described and we apply it to the Indian Ocean, which is the ocean between eastern and let's say the eastern coast of Africa and India. And you will see there that there are some years where we have relatively cooler than normal conditions in the east, and in the west, that is towards Africa, you have warmer than normal conditions. This is what will be typically called a positive Indian Ocean dipole. And since the waters are warmer towards Africa, there is going to be a lot of evaporation, leading also to a lot of rainfall, and this will basically increase the amount of precipitation in the region. Let's go to the next slide. So for the negative phase, it's going to be the reverse one. So for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through that. Let's move on to the next slide. How strong is the El Nino of this year? Next slide, please. Yeah, so how strong is the El Nino of this year? This is basically, can we move back to the next one? Great. So this is basically the observation. What we see in black here is the observation, what happened so far in terms of sea surface temperature. I was telling you that if we have 0.5 degree or more, we'll say that we are in a El Nino situation. This is what we see. We see that by August of this year, we already have reached +1, which is quite double the threshold which is needed to declare an El Nino. So we are indeed in a El Nino. Now, what are the projections? What will be the magnitude? When will it end? So we see that there are some projections from various models, and all the models agree that we are still to see the peak of El Nino. When I take all the dynamicals models, for example, this curve in red, in red, you will see that they anticipate that the peak of El Nino will be observed sometime in December this year, so between actually November and December of this year. And what will be the peak temperature? It could be +2 degrees Celsius. So I will try to compare that with what we saw in a couple of years back. So when we get back to 2019, 2018, 2020, we got a maximum El Nino of plus 0.9. That is, what we are seeing now is basically the peak that was observed in 2018 that led to the floods in Eastern Africa. So we expect this year's El Nino to be even stronger than that. And when will it end? The projections are not certain yet because we cannot see beyond 6 months of lead time, but we expect that the El Nino will persist until at least the winter of next year. So until February of next year, we will still likely be in El Nino conditions. Let's get to the next slide on the IOD, the Indian Ocean Dipole. So for the Indian Ocean Dipole, while we wait for the, yeah, great. So for the Indian Ocean Dipole, as you could see also, we have exceeded the threshold of 0.5 degree. This was exceeded earlier last month in August. And it is also expected that it will peak by November, December of this year, and the peak could be as much as 1.6 degree, meaning that actually we are going to have a peak that was relatively lower than what was observed in 2020, and that led to the extreme floods in East Africa. What we need to know is actually there is a kind of combination of the impacts of El Nino and the Indian Ocean Dipole. In Eastern Africa, this big El Nino combined with this positive IOD are both leading to extreme precipitation. Therefore, we should expect a much higher rainfall total by the end of the short rains in East Africa. On the other end, in Southern Africa, when we have a positive Indian Ocean Dipole, it tends to actually increase the precipitation, whereas the El Nino tends to decrease the precipitation there. And as a result, we are going to have a sort of contrast between the two effects, resulting in a relatively low impact of the combination of these two, meaning that we likely will end up having a close to normal situation in Southern Africa. So in summary, and I'm done with my presentation, in summary, in Eastern Africa, because of the strong El Nino and the positive IOD, we should expect more precipitation. In Southern Africa, because the two effects are contrasting, we should expect relatively close to normal situation. In Western Africa, the season is already towards the end. So the season basically goes until end of September, or let's say beginning of October. And that is why I didn't want to mention this region in particular. I think I will stop here because I also elaborated a little bit therefore on the seasonal forecast. I will stop here and I will hand over. Thank you, Damodar.
Thank you so much, Gigma. Thank you for navigating us through the atmospheric physics and climatic dimension that is looming over the region. That's highly appreciated. It seems like the consequence is going to be quite high, and the cost of inaction would be definitely high. So having said that, let's now try to see what are the preparations to El Nino being carried out by our colleagues. So I would now invite Maureen, who is with the World Food Programme as a Anticipatory Action Regional Coordinator. She has agreed to share WFP preparations owing to the El Nino looming crisis in the region. Thank you so much, Maureen, for your time today. Over to you for 10 minutes. Colleagues, in the meantime, if you have any questions, please feel free to make use of the chat box. Over to you, Maureen.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Damodar. Please confirm that you can see my screen.
Yes, we do. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you so much, and good morning, good afternoon to colleagues joined online. As the moderator indicated, my name is Maureen Ambani. I sit in the WFP Regional Bureau for Eastern Africa, and I coordinate work on anticipatory action in the region. So thank you for the invitation here today, just for us to, for me to speak a little bit about what WFP is already doing, especially around anticipatory action ahead of the October to December 2023 season in Eastern Africa. Just starting with a snapshot of actually earlier this year in Somalia, this is the kind of flooding that was actually seen. And now with El Nino, for us in Eastern Africa, it means that in most places there's likely to be heavy rainfall that can lead to flood events, probably maybe much worse than what we are seeing right now on my screen. So maybe I'll just start with A quick overview of what we mean by anticipatory action. Most likely many people on the call already know this, but I thought it's just good to mention that by anticipatory action, at least for the case of WFP and many of the partners, is we're talking about an approach where we predefine actions, we predefine triggers, we already pre-arrange financing such that in case the trigger is reached, we are able to quickly swing into action and try to reduce the risk or prevent it where that's possible of people being adversely impacted and it likely leading to a humanitarian crisis or enhancing an existing crisis that is already ongoing. So that being said, just a quick snapshot of the current work for WFP in the region. This is the number of countries already covering with anticipatory action support in the region. Right now, Rwanda is not shaded, but actually we're about to start work in the region on Rwanda. And what this work involves is basically twofold. One, work on developing the systems for anticipatory action. So working on capacity strengthening to enhance triggers, to enhance systems that can deliver anticipatory action. We also work on now delivering the actions themselves when the forecast indicates that our trigger has been reached. So far in the region, WFP has disbursed up to 10.85 million US dollars, that is until 2022, to support implementation of anticipatory action for drought. Now, with the forecast of El Nino that can lead to heavy rainfall and flooding in much of the region, WFP has already prepositioned about 12 million US dollars that is in our headquarters, such that we can activate implementation of anticipatory action. I know colleagues here from Southern Africa are already aware that actually in Southern Africa, WFP has already activated anticipatory action for drought with a funding envelope of about 10 million, a little bit about 10 million in that region. Now, coming down to what's currently happening in Eastern Africa, but then generally how this is structured in WFP, we have an internal funding mechanism specifically designed to enable quick disbursement of anticipatory actions finance when the trigger is actually reached. But for country offices, together with partners, to be able to access these funds, first of all, we need to have pre-approved anticipatory action plans, which need to be developed at least 3 months before the season starts, or at least 3 months before the first readiness trigger is issued. So it means that for the October to December season, it means that we needed to have had pre-approved anticipatory action plans. I think in the movement you call them early action protocols, 3 months before the October to December season. And then step 2, once the forecast indicates that our readiness trigger has been reached, so basically we have like 2 full sets of triggers. The first trigger that tells you get ready, you might have an event in the next maybe few months or the next days, and then you have a second trigger that says, now it is more certain that this event will occur, so you should activate implementation. So when I refer to the readiness trigger, it's basically the first trigger we receive. So when that first trigger is received, then country offices develop what we call an internal funding request, which is basically now an implementation plan that says these are the triggers that have been reached, these are the actions that we're immediately rolling out right now, these are the partners we are working with, and then as per what this little diagram already shows, once this information is communicated, it's been approved at the regional bureau, it is sent to our headquarters, and in about 24 hours, the funds are received in the country office such that they can implement actions, especially in the window of opportunity between when they still are focused and before the event actually occurs. Now, coming to what's currently happening, in this region, 3 country offices are currently developing anticipatory action plans. We are almost to the last stage, and these are Ethiopia, Somalia, and Uganda. And because El Nino in this region means floods, the emphasis here is a focus on floods. Now, for Ethiopia and Somalia, they're focusing on riverine floods, especially along the Shebele River, which tends to flood quite a bit in both countries. For the case of Uganda, the focus is in Karamoja, and they're focusing on flash floods. Now, in terms of the kinds of impacts that have been prioritized so far, and this is prioritization has been done together with a multi-stakeholder platform. So they have technical working groups that have discussed and prioritized these impacts. We see, of course, loss of lives and assets emerges quite top on the list in most of these countries. Things like disruption of health services, disruption of cropping systems, and also loss of livestock, damage to infrastructure are key things that are of concern in case of flooding in this region. Now, coming to the actions that have again been prioritized to be implemented when the trigger is reached is number one, dissemination of early warning information, which from our implementation so far, we find that this is an action that ideally should be implemented anytime when you're implementing anticipatory action, because it makes sense to give people early warning for either them to decide on by themselves what actions they will take and take it themselves, but also where people need to support to combine it with other actions such that they can implement actions that are needed to avert the risk. So for example, most of the time, WFP does dissemination of early warning together with cash transfers, which we have found that is very beneficial, because then based on early warning, people are able to use the cash to take the necessary actions to prevent losses. So for example, if the early warnings say you need to evacuate, with the cash assistance, people are able to actually move their assets out of the flood-prone areas such that they are not negatively affected. And then in terms of the number of people covered, you can see it varies from country to country, also depending on how many people are actually located in the flood-prone areas and the severity of the potential flood. So the number of people is quite varied, but total so far in these countries is about 467,000 people. But these are people where we mean people who we will directly support with cash transfers. If we start to factor in people who ideally would be reached by early warning information, then the number would be much, much higher than what we are currently seeing. And the budget for this, as per WFP planning, is about $11 million. Now, coming to some of the key aspects in terms of implementation is number one, we have worked together with the Met agencies, together with the IGAD Climate Prediction and Application Center to define triggers such as what you're currently seeing on the screen, specifically for Somalia. So looking at things that at what level does the water need to rise in the river for it to cause a flood? Can we get a forecast that can alert us of this level reaching before the level is actually reached? What is the lead time at which we can get a forecast that can tell us it's time to move, but also some statistics to tell us on how good is this forecast so that we can take action on it. Now, as you can see, the lead time before the flood is very short, 8 to 10 days in most areas. But then these activities we need to do way in advance of that, such that we are ready to quickly swing into action. Now, the table you're seeing right now on the list is just some of the actions that currently the country offices together with partners are starting to do. Like, can they already define who specifically will be targeted for direct support, in what locations? Can we make sure we have the partnership agreements that are needed for us to implement these actions? Can we make sure we start to sensitize communities about this approach and what support they are going to get, and making sure that all of these are ready even before the season starts, such that by the time, days to the flood, which could be any time from the start of the season to the end of the season, we need to make sure that our systems are as ready to go as possible. And then in terms of who we are working with, quite critically, we are working with governments, especially the Disaster Risk Management Agency, so like SODMA for Somalia, the Somalia Disaster Risk Management Bureau for Ethiopia, OPM for Uganda, because these are key agencies in terms of issuing alerts that the triggers have been reached, but also coordinating implementation with various actors on the ground. We're also working quite closely with the national Met agencies, combining whatever information they have available to inform the issuing of a trigger. We're working quite closely with IFRC, who's the regional center in this region, because then we find that in some of the countries, we don't yet have the kinds of forecasting information that are needed to activate, but then whatever capacities IFRC already has, they're bringing it on board to help us make sure we are as ready and as informed as possible. We're also working with the various partners on the ground, especially towards making sure we can deliver these actions to the right people at the right time and covering as many as we can going forward. Thank you very much. I stop here and hand it back to you, Damodar.
Thank you so much, Maureen. Thank you for sharing all the preparations that WFP has done owing to the looming crisis. It's so encouraging to note that WFP has already pre-positioned $12 million for El Nino, and activation has already been taken place in Southern Africa. I think there is quite a lot of opportunity for us to collaborate in countries as well. Having said that, let's continue this exchange and learning from each other and borrowing Phoebe's word. Let's also try to see whose mothers cooks the best dishes. Having said that, as I have learned, you have to leave in a while. So before you that, there are a couple of questions for you for WFP. I would appreciate if you could quickly respond to those. Like, let me quickly read it out. One is from Jeff, like, what is the difference between early warning information and early warning messages and advisories? That is one, and there is other one from Caroline. Can you clarify it from the country offices regarding the pre-approved anticipatory action plans and whether they have been already triggered now because of El Nino? And similarly about some updates on Southern Africa and Sahel region. These are good questions for you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Damodar and colleagues here. And apologies, I need to step out for another meeting, but I'll respond to those questions. So on the difference between early warning messages and advisories, they're not necessarily different things. It's just that people call them different things. The idea is that we need to communicate to people on when is there likelihood to be heavy rainfall that can lead to floods, and what kinds of actions can they take by themselves to avoid the risk of being heavily impacted. So ideally, that is the kind of early warning information that we are talking about. So these kinds of information are usually developed together with the Met services, but key actors, including, say, community DRR committees where they actually exist. And then coming then to the question from Caroline. So these anticipatory action plans that I was saying the 3 country offices are working on, right now they have not been activated because the challenge with floods is that you get only days before the event when the trigger is actually reached. What we are doing right now is already developing and pre-approving these plans and keeping them ready to swing into action in case the trigger is reached. But then we also realize that just sitting and waiting will not get us in a good place where we can implement. We still need to have some basic level of readiness. Like for us, for WFP, for cash transfers, we need to make sure that we have agreements in place with financial service providers. We need to make sure that we can preposition funds even with these financial providers. We need to be clear on specifically who we will target. All of these processes take time. And if we just sit and wait for 10 days before, say, the flood alert is issued, then we won't be able to have enough time to carry out these processes and actually implement the actions. So right now, because the forecast already indicates there's a high likelihood, and in fact, IFRC was saying like an 85% chance of getting above average rainfall in the season, we are putting in place basic readiness actions. And then based on the trigger, the anticipatory action plans will be activated. And when they're activated, it means that we will be ready to swing into very quick actions. And then Caroline also had a question about, I think, Southern Africa, which I've mentioned, but also the Sahel. I think the Sahel right now, the season is past, so WFP is not intending to activate at least this year. Thank you, and back to you, Damodar.
Thank you, Maureen. Thank you so much for your time and all your insights and sharing with us the WFP preparations for the looming El Nino. Colleagues, let's give a big round of virtual applause to Maureen for her time and insights today. Thank you, Maureen. Thank you so much.
Thank you, colleagues, and all the best. I look forward to further communication from here.
Colleagues, before we move to another presentation, we have two quick questions for Gigma. Gigma, I hope you're still here. One is about, like, when you say Southern Africa will experience a normal situation, what does that mean? That's one. And other one is related to whether El Nino phenomena has a specific trigger. Could you quickly respond to those two and then presentation? Over to you, Gigma. Very quick response. Nino, are you there?
Hi, this is Dagim. Actually, I think Gigma went back to the workshop, so I don't think he can answer these questions right now.
Okay, no worries. We'll find other ways to get these answers delivered to the people. And having said that, I would now move to you, Dagim, for your help in terms of navigating us through the different risks that El Nino and Indian Ocean Dipole would pose to different countries in Africa. So over to you for next 10 minutes, Dagim.
All right, thank you very much. So hello, everyone. Very nice to meet you. My name is Dagim, and I'm the Anticipatory Action Delegate for West Africa based in Dakar, but actually currently in Burkina Faso, like Igma, for a workshop. Today, I'm going to talk about a risk and vulnerability analysis that I conducted in the context of El Nino. So it follows a little bit about... Hello? Sorry. Yeah. Could you go back? Sorry. Yeah. So I'm going to try to understand with this risk analysis who is targeted and what can sort of be anticipated in terms of impact. And the way I sort of conducted this exercise initially, and the way it started, it was because we're missing some clear insights about potential consequences of El Nino, typically in the countries of the West and Sahel region. So we knew historically many of them were impacted, but we couldn't pinpoint out to what level they would be. And in parallel, there were overlapping risks related to floods and drought, and it was difficult to inform as well national societies on where to reorient their resources and effort at the time. And so with this, we sort of up with the risk analysis, which sort of clearly tries to explain which countries in Africa, not specifically just the West African region, but also in East and Southern Africa, which of them would be at greatest threat. And to do this assessment, I basically tried to identify the main components of risk, which you see on the right-hand side. Sorry, could you go back on the previous slide? Yeah. So the risk itself, I looked at the individual components, which are the hazard frequency itself, so the occurrence of the event, whether it's going to be a high level of rainfalls leading to floods or a decreased amount of rainfall leading to dry spell. I looked also at exposure, so what or who will be at risk, and then the vulnerability, meaning how susceptible something is before it gets hit in the absence of a specific coping mechanism or capacity. And to sort of capture this information, I looked on secondary data that were available to me to avoid the process of collection, but also because time and resources did not permit me to do it very fast. So now for the hazard itself, I used data provided by the ACMAT, so the Center for Meteorological Applications for Development, and they have a team or task force collecting data since 1987 related to the ENSO and IOD indicators that Gigma just described before. And so this would really tell us, like, predict the frequency and strength of warmer conditions in the different regions of Sahel and wetter conditions in the case of East Africa. And then for exposure, I looked at the proportion of population that will be affected in a country, which basically means that I looked at areas or regions within a country known to be affected by El Nino. And I tried to identify the population number in those areas and then see how this is compared to the total country population, or the population within the whole country. And lastly, I looked at vulnerability. And for vulnerability, there's already an existing database most of you know about, which is the Inform Risk. And it basically sort of helps me, or they provides indicators assessing risk and vulnerability of countries for a specific disaster. And so I tried to compile these three different information, sort of group them together, average them to obtain the risk, which I then classified using a common scale that we always use in the IFRC, especially in terms of emergency response framework, which is identifying the risk or the disaster as low, medium, or high level scale. So if we move to the next slide, I just did like a very rough mapping to visualize the countries affected. So with the Sahel region, they would be affected by drought during the months of July to September, end of September, beginning of October. In the southern region, likewise, we could see also that they would be affected by drought during the period of November and March. And then for the Horn of Africa, it's mostly going to be flood during October and January. You'll note as well that in some countries, you would see both a mix of risk and of floods and then droughts or high number of precipitations and then low number of precipitations, especially for Nigeria, Burkina Faso, and South Sudan. And in these instances, specifically, what usually happens is that we tend to have a period of intense high-level precipitations, and just right away we follow with instances of very low levels of rainfall, putting even more damages to structures and crops. We can move to the next slide. And so for the remaining sort of last three slides, what I wanted to show you is a little bit the assessment, what the score was that I came up with, or that this analysis provided. And just for the sake of importance, I only reported the countries in the regions where the risk was either high or medium plus, which in other words means leaning towards a high risk. And if you want itself the full analysis, you can definitely ask for a copy of the full report. For West and Central Africa here, it is important to note that what really sort of pulled the risk up was not necessarily just the current vulnerable or humanitarian situation within those countries, but more the amount of people exposed and the previous instances of El Nino in the past, often hitting those countries specifically. And while the window seems to be almost over, end of September, beginning of October, it's almost there, but it is still important for national societies to sort of keep an eye and remain alert for these remaining weeks, as dryness may persist and increase in certain areas of countries. So in this case, where this is felt, an option may be for these national societies to sort of look into and maybe consider applying for an imminent draft if needed. Can we move to the next slide? And so in the case of West Africa, for East Africa, the situation is a little bit tricky because many of these countries that are at risk, we know them, and they are really at high risk almost at all levels of these different indicators representing risk. And so we also have multiple crises taking place at the same time, typically in Sudan, South Sudan, and Ethiopia, where there is high civil unrest and food security is quite high. It's always good also to have really a clear vision of the different existing humanitarian needs to see how El Nino may aggravate further, but also how El Nino anticipatory measures may be hampered because of lack of resources, capacity, or access constraints. But in some cases, though, however, in the context of Ethiopia, we already have an early action protocol or plan around for anticipatory action related to floods to sort of mitigate some of the impact. One is being developed in South Sudan, but most likely won't be ready on time for October, which is in a few weeks. So for these remaining national societies or countries, alerting them on these upcoming risks is quite important. It will be also maybe an idea would be that to also look at potential funds, especially the emergency appeal regarding hunger crisis, to sort of support some of the maybe measures to take in advance or the response if it's related to food security. Maybe moving to the last slide, and then this one is for Southern Africa, and so here we have a little bit more time for planning, especially for some of the countries. In the case of Zimbabwe, for example, we have an early action protocol for drought, if I'm not mistaken. But given the higher risk of also the other countries shown there, preparations of potential imminent droughts is an option, and also some pre-positioning could be done by some of these national societies if needed. So for the sake of time, I'm just going to stop here. But for those, as I mentioned, for those who are interested in having the full report, I can certainly share this with you. And please feel free to drop me a message or an email if you have questions. And yeah, I guess that's it for me. Thank you very much. And sorry if you heard the noise behind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dazim. Thank you for walking us through the El Nino risk and other drivers that also influence the phenomenon. The detailed report that you just mentioned, that would be really appreciated if you could share that. And having said that, I would now hand it over to PB to take it further. Phoebe, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Damuda and Dajem. Maybe Dajem, before you leave, there are some few questions on the chat box. If you'd help us kindly to respond to them, I think that would be very great. Colleagues, because of time, allow us to move on to the next part of the session, where we'll be getting to see what some of the national society are actually doing in preparation for this El Nino. And we'll start with Kenya Red Cross. Peter Murgor, are you there? Can you hear me? I can't see Peter Murgor. Emmanuel, are you there to start us off? Emma, can you hear me? Maybe before we go to Emma, Sheila, do you want to start us off? Yes, I can hear you now. Please go ahead. I'll just quickly share the screen for you. Please go ahead, Emma.
Waiting for the screen. Yes, good morning and good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Vintali Emmanuel. I work with the Uganda Red Cross. I manage the Climate and Environment Unit and the focal point for anticipatory action. And with my presentation, I'm going to share some bit of highlights on how we are getting ready for the El Nino 2023. Next slide. So from Uganda, the El Nino prediction, the government of Uganda through the Ministry of Water and Environment released a forecast for September, October, November, December of largely above normal across most parts of the country. Like you can see on the map, it's actually only a few districts in the southeastern part of the country and the northwest that are not so much predicted, northeast, sorry, that are not so much predicted to have enhanced rainfall. So during the third National Climate Outlook Forum that we co-hosted with the Uganda National Met Authority, that's where they really highlighted that the possibility of experiencing El Nino conditions across most of these parts. And in Uganda, what we know really, these are largely associated with impacts with the hydro-related problems like floods, landslides, and this is especially in the mountainous areas of the Renzori, the Mount Elgon, and the low-lying areas, and with the cascading impacts of waterborne diseases, including cholera. The last events of 2015, 2016 are from this fora. It was highlighted that it was moderate impact compared to what we are expecting in this coming season. So moving forward, next slide. So moving forward, the Red Cross working with the partners in country, of course, like I've highlighted, we co-hosted this third National Climate Outlook Forum, and we worked jointly with the Office of the Prime Minister and partners to develop advisories. This was largely for disaster risk reduction and anticipatory action, but also internally we developed an El Nino preparedness and response plan for the 3 months where we expect these events for Red Cross. And we've been working with the Office of the Prime Minister on developing a national El Nino Preparedness and Contingency Plan 2023. This plan highlights both anticipatory actions, response mechanisms, and also preparing for effective response. This is from the national level to the district level through the district disaster management committees. Next slide. So also for us here internally, we've intensified monitoring of the impact-based forecasting portal for any potential early action protocol activation. What I need to highlight is Uganda Red Cross developed its early action plan and it got approved through the IFRC in 2020. So we've been monitoring events then for any potential activation. So with the El Nino prediction that we have intensified monitoring. We've done orientations for some of the users we have for the IBF portal for routine monitoring for any potential activation. And we've scaled up the implementation of the readiness activities as part of the Early Action Protocol Readiness Fund that we already have in Uganda. And at the branch level, we've sent out alerts to the high-risk branches, and we've activated the Red Cross action teams. These are the ARACATs at the community level to support with both monitoring for any potential community alerts and assessments for episodic events that we've actually started receiving in most parts of the country. We've as well worked jointly. We are in a couple of consortium projects. So we've worked jointly to preposition items, regional stock items. These are NFIs and cash. We are part of 3 different eco-funded disaster preparedness consortium projects, some with the Netherlands Red Cross, with the Danish Church Aid, with the Catholic Relief Services, with the Oxfam and other partners. So we are jointly working in those consortia to make sure that the items in these different warehouses at the regional level have stock, and we are ready to take an action once we get to events. And relatedly, we've activated what we call the regional EPR focal points. We've categorized the country based on the risk, and in each of these different regions where we expect events, we've assigned specific individuals who are responsible for taking a keen interest in what's happening in these different locations. Next slide. And this is the last slide. We've conducted a joint simulation exercise with the 12 districts from the Lake Choga region, from the Mount Elgon, from the Teso, and other sub-regions where we expect these different events to manifest. And the purpose of this really is to review the assumptions that these different district disaster management committees put in their contingency plans, to test the functionality of some of these coordination mechanisms that are highlighted in these different contingency plans, to improve coordination, clarity of roles, but also most importantly, to put the discussions around El Nino as to priorities for the district disaster management committees. And as one of the major outcomes for this event is the 12 districts that have been part of this joint simulation exercise have developed their respective action plans that will facilitate El Nino anticipatory actions and response. And this joint exercise, we've had partners who are part of the different consortium projects that we are part of, from Oxfam, from Catholic Relief Services, from CS BAG, Danish Church Aid, IFRC, and other partners who we are working with on DP across the country. Next slide. So this is a snapshot of what happened in the simulation exercise. We had injects on anticipatory action. We had injects on early warning, where the different DDMCs practiced disseminating early warning information on radio. We had injects on assessments, on rapid assessments. We had injects on beneficiary registration and identification. We had injects on response. We actually distributed 70 kits as part of the simulation exercise, and there were very many lessons that were emerging and reflections from the districts. We also had injects on IDP CAF management. We know largely in Uganda, some of these events manifest through, they create a lot of IDPs. So we had specific scenarios on some of this, and districts were able to get through refreshers of all the basics of camp management and what's expected as part of the El Nino. Next slide. So moving forward, what we are planning is to continue with the joint planning and coordination. This is at the national level with the national DRR platform and the DDMCs, where our branches are now actively participating in all these different meetings. We also plan internally to explore a drift for imminent crisis, as we see from the predictions and what we expect from the previous occurrences. Some of these events might really manifest beyond the internal capacities. We also really plan to do large-scale trainings on IDF with other stakeholders that we are working with, including rolling out the Red Cross Action Teams trainings at the community level. And we started earlier discussions with FAO, and there is a potential for funding to implement some of special actions in specific geographical areas. I think this is in 10 districts of Teso region and the Mountain Elgon region. So Phoebe, this is part of what we've done and the plans from the Uganda Red Cross. Over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Emmanuel. Already quite a lot that's going on in terms of the El Nino preparedness, and well done to the Uganda team. I believe the rest of the national societies in the region are learning from you and are inspired by you to already start taking action. At this point, I just want to give a brief chance to the Netherlands Red Cross as a partner to some of our national society to just speak as to what they are also doing in terms of El Nino preparedness. Sheila, over to you if you can hear me.
Yeah, thank you, Phoebe, and good afternoon, good morning, colleagues. Yes, I think this discussion is of interest to the Netherlands Red Cross because we support most of the national societies in disaster preparedness. We've had cycles of funding with a 5-year cycle of funding. So it's really important that we also pay attention to this El Nino preparedness discussion. As I mentioned, we also want to ensure as we strengthen the capacities of the national societies, we are also proactive in terms of looking into the preparedness measures and anticipatory actions within national societies to ensure that they are also very effective and looking into their response mechanism, targeting the specific country levels that we support. And also with this, we do a lot of multilateral support to IFRC as well. So it's also an angle that we do both approaches at country level and at IFRC level. Next, Phoebe. So I mentioned earlier why this conversation around El Nino preparedness is important to us. We do have a funding partnership with our Ministry of Foreign Affairs that looks into two elements around increased emphasis on preparedness and anticipatory action. And within the national societies, we have those 5-year cycle funding for 5 national societies, that is Mali, CAR, Ivory Coast, South Sudan, Zambia, and of course previously we had a circle with the EAP, which was Kenya, Uganda, and Ethiopia. So I'm very happy to see, Emmanuel, that you guys have taken off and you can manage your own, and that's all about preparedness and strengthening capacities of the national society. So looking into this, we encourage the national society for a partnership of 5 years. We cannot just continue implementing the projects as business as usual, because in between that, they experience several shocks, they experience several disasters. And it's based on this, we encourage our partner national societies and country teams to look proactively into their plans, which activities they have in their projects can contribute and support the national society El Nino preparedness plans. So that is one of the areas. So we've had 2 series of meetings with the countries. We had one for the English speaking countries, and we also had one last week with the French speaking countries. So this is something we encourage our partners to ensure that our projects, bilateral projects, are contributing to the wider response system of the national societies. We've also encouraged, most of them have gone through the PR process. We now have the seasonal checklist, which is quick. We have prioritized the components. The national societies who have gone through the PR, I think, are quite familiar with this. They should be able to just look at it, align it with the El Nino preparedness plan, prioritize the areas and capacities they would like to strengthen. And with the support of IFRC, I think they also had a training TOT a couple of months ago. So most of them are ready to go. So I want to believe that also the capacities that they had, they're able to roll it out. As well, we were also encouraging them not to just look at EAPs separately as well, just proactively look at their readiness activities and their prepositioning. As Emmanuel mentioned, within the project, the previous circle funding from the Care Foundation, we supported in developing the monitoring system, the IBF, but we realized that, within that last year, the last 5 years, we were looking at the drought. So here we are now looking at flooding. So we also encouraged the 510 support to look into more of the refresh as part of the readiness and activities to support the national societies a bit on the IBF model, to look at it so that they're able to continue active monitoring and create communication messaging that the groups that they had developed before during the EAP process development. We do also include a crisis modifier in most of our projects, all actually within the preparedness. So this is something as well we were encouraging the country teams, hey, look at your crisis modifier plans, ensure that you have the funding, if it means being transferred from the HQ to be at the country level, so that it can also support the national societies activate their whether it's their contingency plans through the early action or early response. So this is something as well we are proactively engaging. We do have several programs as well where we are the lead on Eco PPP. It's the same thing as well that we are looking, so that the projects that we have, we are not looking at them as projects, but also contributing to the wider disaster management system of the national societies, especially those that have the preparedness and anticipatory elements. Lastly, as well, thank you as well. I think IFRC, you touched well on this. We are also keen on looking at the supporting the hunger crisis, especially from the looking at the benefits the communities can harness from the El Nino effects, more looking into climate smart, supporting the recovery, and on regions where they'll be looking at normal rainfall. So this is a conversation we are open to have with IFRC and continue supporting the national societies, considering these are the crises they face within this 5-year partnership that we have. And lastly is what the national societies always continue to do. It's part of the preparedness. Coordination is also an important element. So these are just conversations to make sure that our projects that we do are agile and supportive to the national society as well. Thank you, people. We also try to be very adaptive as the Netherlands Red Cross to ensure that our programs are fit for purpose. Thank you. Back to you, Phoebe.
Great. Thank you so much, Sheila. It's really good to see what our partner national societies are also doing to support our national societies in terms of preparing for this El Nino phenomena, as well as its associated impact. Colleagues, we continue to learn. I see a great discussion going on in the chat box. Please keep asking all those questions, and our colleagues who have also just presented will continue to respond to your questions and comments on the chat box. Now we want to learn from our colleagues from outside the movement. I want to welcome Cyril from the Food Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Cyril is the resilience team leader, and he's going to share with us also what FAO is planning to do with regards to the El Nino 2023. Over to you, Cyril, if you can hear me.
Hi, Phoebe. I can hear you loud and clear. I hope that you can hear me as well.
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, very good. So thanks a lot for the opportunity, and very informative conversation indeed from the experience from the Red Cross societies, from WFP as well, and of course I feel privileged to be invited to also share our experience. Look, I mean, if I listen to what we have heard so far, we have heard a lot about risks associated to El Nino. I will take a slightly different angle here, but also looking at opportunities. But I will come back to that in a second. If we go to the next slide. I mean, very much in line with what other colleagues and partners have said before. Indeed, El Nino will trigger some below average rainfall in part of the world, above average rainfall in other parts. So FAO has been preparing a sort of a global plan for the August-December 2023 period, with, of course, different scenarios. And we are looking primarily at 4 big areas: Eastern Africa, Southern Africa, Latin America, and what we call the Corridor Seco, and then Asia and Pacific. And of course, each plan is, of course, specific to what is anticipated in this region. If we go to the next slide, then, as I said, I think that we have heard a lot about the risks, but frankly speaking, I really would like to talk also about the opportunities. And I think there is a collective responsibility for all of us to also balance between the risks and the opportunities and where we want the money to go. And if I look into Eastern Africa in particular, I would say that for a region that has been affected by drought over the past 2.5 years, having rain is a blessing. It's good. And as WFP said, I mean, it's only the riverine areas that will be at risk per se, but largely outside of these riverine areas, there will be a lot of opportunities. And there will be large opportunities for people to bounce back after the drought and to recover faster with above average rainfall comparing to normal average rainfall. So we should not, in our narrative, just basically scare donors and tell them the risks are huge, when in fact in the region, in Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia, and partially in Uganda, I would say there will be 95% of the population who will benefit from the above average rainfall, and maybe not more than 5% who will basically be at risk. So let's be very clear as well on how we balance our narrative to resource partners and make sure that basically the opportunities are seized as well, largely here. If you go to the next slide. Now going a little bit more into what we are planning in Eastern Africa. And as I said, it's a bit the balance between capitalizing on the good rain, being aware of the risks, and then basically planning for the specific geographic areas where there will be floods and potential displacement. So we have a sort of a course of action that is looking into 3 categories of intervention. The first one is about, indeed, capitalizing on opportunities, which means making sure that farmers have inputs for the short rains, for example, and potentially if El Nino continues in 2024 for the long rains next year, which means farm inputs, which means basically having all the process in place for either cash and vouchers, tractor hours, and also basically during the dry season, if you anticipate good rain, well, basically let's invest on water harvesting, because when the rain will come, you will capitalize on the infrastructure. So I think as FAO, we have had a clear message to donors saying, don't look only at the risk, but let's look at the possibility to bounce back faster than normal. On the action 2, it's about protection, and it's about protecting assets and protecting production system, which is indeed about water infrastructure, such as in Somalia, where you will be consolidating, rehabilitating potentially the existing broken river banks and so on and so forth. It's potentially making sure that farmers along the river will have access to hermetic bags, the pigs bags for storing the grain that they have, for example, that even if they are flooded, then they don't lose entirely the previous harvest. And of course, it's about being able to move animals and provide animal health. So this is a second set of interventions about protecting. And then there is something that is slightly outside of the usual way of working, which is the action 3, which is basically saying that even along the riverbanks in Ethiopia, in Somalia, and maybe in Kenya, even if people have planted and then they will be flooded and may lose 100% of the plant in the field, there is still an opportunity to plant later. And that's what we call the flood recessing or flood recession intervention, which is basically when water recesses, then taking advantage of the moisture for planting short maturing varieties that will not be 100% of the harvest of the normal seeds, but will prevent people to have zero harvest this season, potentially next season. So as I say, it's a mixture of addressing risk and also looking into the opportunities. If you go into the next slide, how does it work? I mean, as we said, it's not about waiting for the rain and looking at what happens and being reactive. It's about being prepared for. And obviously, the action 1 and 2 need to happen during the dry season, because even if you want, for example, the action 3 to happen on replanting after the floods, you will need to strike deals with retailers, with basically seed producers and seed sellers, to make sure that there is also still seeds in stock so that you can still buy and then replant after. So it's a lot of logistic preparation, having the right varieties and basically being ready to answer sequentially to the different threat and risk, and geographically also to where it will happen. What you see on action 1 and 2 and 3 for the short rain preparation of the October-December rain could be replicated, of course, for the long rain next year, which means that basically in December, we are already going to start talking about the long rains and saying if El Nino remains, basically we will need the same action 1, 2, 3 set of intervention to take place. If you go to the next slide, which is, yeah, exactly. So action 1 and 2 now, what is very clear here is that these interventions that we have foreseen in terms of water harvesting structures, in terms of inputs, animal health, cash and voucher, this is not a separate plan. What we are saying to donors here is that you guys have in your hand the humanitarian response plan in Somalia, for example, in Ethiopia. Both of these plans are significantly underfunded. And we are telling them, put your money into these plans, because it's not that, I would say, responding to El Nino is, by typology of intervention, is very different from what we would do in normal humanitarian context, because it's not one shock that happens in isolation. So we are saying to donors, basically finance the humanitarian response plan 2023, because the large quantity of activities that FAO is going to do in preparation and in capitalization of potential good benefit of El Nino are already budgeted under the HRPs. So finance the HRPs. And I think it's important that donors do understand that they are not basically having to choose between a humanitarian response plan and potentially an El Nino response plan, because largely the activities are embedded already into the humanitarian response plan. I think that should be my last slide. I don't know if there is, if you click one more time, yeah, maybe some key messages. As I said, and as colleagues already said, El Nino in Eastern Africa will bring excess water, deficit water in Southern Africa, deficit water in Corridor Seco. This we know it, but excess water in Eastern Africa. As I said, there are risks associated to that, but it's largely for the people an opportunity. And just take the example here of Kenya. Kenya during the drought had a caseload of above 4 million people in IPC phase 3 and above, which is basically severely food insecure. The latest analysis after the long rain, and the long rain in Kenya were reasonably okay, not great, but reasonably okay. Already the caseload has reduced from 4.2 to 2.8 million. And then the forecast with El Nino coming is to further going down to 1.4. So as I said, there is an opportunity. If there are rains and if people have seeds, they may even reach bumper harvest, with the exception, of course, as we said, of the flood-prone areas along the rivers, for which we need to have a specific action. What I would argue as well is that climate information will matter, but it's not only about us reaching a consensus about which area will be water deficit or water excess. It's about farmers and herders to know it. What I call the last mile. We need to work with them. They need to understand that for a large number of them, there will be a lot of opportunities, and those at risk need to know they will be at risk. So the last mile, I think it's very much requiring partnerships here. And I think that the Red Cross societies and the network that you do have across the continent are a real blessing, and we need to capitalize on it all together on making sure that productive sector farmers, herders in rural area do know about the risk, but also the opportunities. And then finally, I think that what we are asking for here to resource partners is also flexible and advanced financing. I think that the colleague from the Netherlands, the Red Cross, was talking about crisis modifier. I think it's not enough to have crisis modifier, because basically to modify, you need to have a crisis. Here we are saying that we need to anticipate on a no regret basis. And if there is a risk, we address. And if there is no risk or no damage, then we will reprogram. But it's not only about the crisis modifier, it's really about flexible and advanced financing. Let me stop here, Phoebe.
Great. Thank you so much, Cyril, for that very, very, very interesting presentation. And this is what I was telling my colleagues at the start. It's good to also sample other mothers cooking, because while we were thinking much on risk, we also have to start thinking about what are the opportunities that this phenomena also really brings. So thank you very much, Cyril, for that presentation. And we look forward to working with the FAO in this season and even beyond. Colleagues, we want to move on to the next session, and I'll hand it over back to you, Damoda, to take us through the next phase of the presentation.
Thank you so much, Phoebe. Thank you, colleagues, for all the interesting presentations and very valuable inspiration that and learnings that we can learn from each other, not only within the Red Cross Red Crescent, but from our other humanitarian colleagues as well, like from FAO and WFP. There's quite a lot of conversation, interesting chat going on in the chat box. Let's continue that. And in interest of time, going forward, I would now invite Stella from IFRC, the regional coordinator, regional coordinator disaster law program at IFRC, to share us some insights on how can we best work with the public authorities in this looming crisis, and how can we think of different regulatory barriers, and how can we navigate those. So over to you, Stella, for next 10 minutes.
Thank you so much, colleagues. Like Damoda said, my name is Stella, and I'm just going to be taking you briefly to some of the potential challenges that could come up in terms of the operations, especially in the need for scaling up of these operations. I'm not going to take too much time, because I do realize that there's still quite a bit to be covered. And I'll also take you through some of the tools that are available to support preparedness for engagement and coordination with public authorities. I think we've already seen a very good example from the Uganda Red Cross with the CIMEX that they carried out. And going forward, it's important to have this kind of conversations with our public authorities to have a coordinated response should we need to have a large-scale response in the event of floods coming up. So just going on to the next slide, when we think about the common problems that we face during operations, we always have challenges with equipment coming into the country. We have challenges with vehicles coming in, telecommunications equipment that probably would be needed for managing search and rescue. We have challenges sometimes with recognition of professional qualifications of expertise who are coming in to support local capacities or to enhance local capacities, as well with visas and such like requests. In the event that we have extreme large-scale disasters that would require scale-up, that requires international assistance, we also do see that we have challenges with how international assistance is initiated in the event of such a need. And then also, as you move to the next slide, you'll see that we also have challenges with relief consignments coming in, with medical equipments and medication coming in, with there not being express provisions on how to allow this kind of consignments to come in the case of an emergency setting. Most legislative processes that allow for relief and consignments relating to medication and medical equipment to come in are usually quite bureaucratic, have a lot of red tape and can be very slow. Sometimes you have 6 months processing before things are actually cleared. Also having customs duties that are extremely taxing, very, very heavy, very stringent, customs clearance processes that are extremely bureaucratic, so it's slowing down the ability for relief to come in. So this is quite a bit of a challenge. And as we are getting more and more into the cash transfer systems, and having this being nationalized, there are sometimes restrictions on cash transfers, and this can be a burden on our ability to be able to support affected populations in the event of disasters. So one of the tools that we've developed as the disaster law program, and we've been working with a few national societies across the region, is a model pre-disaster agreement. If you go to the next slide. So this is a preparedness tool that's largely aimed at facilitating humanitarian preparedness and response for the Red Cross. And it basically is looking towards creating an enabling environment, making sure that we have an enabling environment in place for the national society and also for the public authorities to be able to harness the great nature of the auxiliary role and fulfill their mandate and basically ensuring that there's a sustained Red Cross, Red Crescent humanitarian pathway for humanitarian preparedness and response. It's an agreement that is largely entered into by the host government, national society, the host government and the host national society and IFRC. But again, like I said, this is a model agreement. It is specifically supposed to enhance the national society's auxiliary role with its public authorities, and it's wholly modifiable. This agreement, it is to the determination at the country level or to the context of the country, which public authority would be the signatory on this agreement, whether it would be the Office of the President, whether it would be the Ministry of Interior, whether it would be the National Disaster Management Agency. It's really a contextual agreement. And it's largely supposed to be enhancing an understanding of what are the roles and the responsibilities of all the parties involved in this. It is negotiated by the host national society with its public authorities. And the reason that it's important is that it tries to offer quite a bit of clarity on where are the entry points of the host national society into the national government planning. Because as we've heard from different speakers, but also as we've been reading about this preparedness for El Nino from different platforms, we do see that a lot of host countries, host national governments have already started to put into place specific national plans and strategies to mitigate against the impacts of El Nino. So it's also important for us to understand, especially as Red Cross, where do national societies come into play in these national strategies. So pre-disaster agreements do allow for this negotiation to have a clear understanding of the roles and responsibilities, how communication channels are going to be set up, how information is going to be shared, how data is going to be shared. And I think having an understanding of how we're going to be managing data and information and communication can allow us to harness some of the opportunities that the previous speaker from FAO just mentioned going forward, but also just to allow us to be better adaptable and have a better predictive model of how to better respond to the needs of our affected populations. As I mentioned as well, largely the scope of this agreement is really just focused on preparedness for response, and it's ideally supposed to be working within non-conflict areas. But this again is a contextual agreement and it's wholly modifiable, and it's available for sharing, and I can share this with Phoebe and colleagues to share with the rest of you on this call. An additional tool that we have that's available on the IFRC Go website, and you see this in the next slide, is the IDRL dashboard. So as a program, we carry out mappings and assessments basically to analyze what legislative frameworks in different countries across the region look like in terms of allowing or expediting humanitarian assistance within the country. And we've carried out several of these studies, and we put the key facilities or the key information that would allow for preparation for response. So any partner wishing to respond to a particular crisis or emergency within a country can understand what are the likely red tapes or what are the likely obstacles that they're going to face within that country, and how can they already start to mitigate against them. So if you go to the next slide, you can see some of the key information that you can find that's available on the IDRL Go on the dashboard. It talks about the legal facilities that are available to national societies. So are they getting tax exemptions for importation of relief consignments or any other equipments that they would need to use for their operations? As IFRC or other humanitarian actors who are operating within the country, are there other legal facilities that they're being accorded to in terms of the legislative and policy frameworks within that particular country? Are there expedited processes for visa clearance, for entry permits? Are there expedited processes for recognition of professional qualifications, etc.? What all are the customs procedures that are available? What are the legal facilities for other international actors? And what are the key legislative frameworks or the key legislative tools that are inform humanitarian assistance or guide humanitarian assistance within that particular country? So as you can see, like with the example that's here on this slide, and this is in the case of Namibia, so this is just an example, you can see it gives you the key information of who is the focal point, or which is the agency in the country that's the key focal point in managing disasters, the primary or the apex law on managing disaster risk management within the country, and other subsidiary legislations that support this, and also some contact information on how we can be able to support. So I think that's all I had to share. I know I've gone quite quickly, but I do recognize that the time is quite short. But I'm happy to support in terms of sharing the template of the model agreement for national societies to engage and begin conversations with their public authorities on better planning in the anticipation of these disasters, and also how to navigate through the IDRL Go platform to access information for their preparedness efforts. Thank you, and back to you, Damoda.
Thank you, Estella. Thank you so much for all your insights on the legislative and legal matters pertaining to the DRM work in general. Having said that, we would now move to a bit another segment of the webinar. I would say so far we already know what El Nino or Indian Ocean Dipole is about to bring us. We also have seen what our humanitarian friends from WFP and FAO already doing. We also have some inspiration from our own colleagues within the family from Uganda in terms of their readiness and preparatory works concerning El Nino and El Nino phenomenon. And it's now time for us to discuss on how can we act early, because we already have an indication or an outlook of El Nino. So it's time for us to discuss on how can we act early that will help us reduce and mitigate the impacts of El Nino and IoT on the most vulnerable population in the continent. So we'll now devote next 20 minutes to discuss on the early actions that can be taken by sectors on food security and livelihoods, shelter, wash, and health. So I would now first invite Gilbert to share some experience or insights on the potential or possible early actions with regard to food security and livelihoods. Gilbert, over to you for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Can you move the slide? I just shared this slide to share with you how everything we are going to be doing ends up interacting with the food security or the food insecurity and malnutrition at household level. So the El Nino would trigger those events in different areas, droughts, floods, and in some areas it gets dry. But at the end of the day, everything will come up and meet or affect each household or each person with regards to their livelihoods, the food component. So with all these impacts and all this connectedness, I thought I could share, based on what has been presented and going to be presented by others, how can we respond in all those different areas, so that we position or assist our communities to be better able to survive the period they are getting into. So the next slide will be showing that. So we are looking at how can we all assist each other, so that whatever we do in this period that we are before or during and after, as we recover from it, move into or assist communities to be food secure. This is the main issue, and then build their resilience as we go. Let's go on. So this is the period where we are. I know other guys will talk about how we do the action protocols, but in the livelihood food security, this is the time to start scaling up our safety nets for basic needs and livelihood protection assistance. We're also looking at livestock emergency at the moment, making sure the systems are in place. If you remember what the FAO presentation was also talking about, taking advantage of the opportunities. So this is the time we need to start setting ourselves so that we capture on that. So these are some of the actions or the activities that we could do at the moment, depending which way we are. And as we move into, click again, into the emergency, it's not going to be a time to just relax and be faced with the emergency. There are things that we can do. So depending if you're in Southern Africa, we are talking, make sure that's the time to be providing now that water which is missing. Or if there's a flood here in the Eastern Africa, it will be time to provide repair. Also looking at the health wash and nutrition components that could be done. I'm sure my colleagues will talk about that. But let's not also forget about the protection issues, protection of the environment or households as we go. I think we can play those slides so that we manage the time. Yes, and the later part of things that we need to do at the ground. So we are actually circulating around at the moment, we are the early emergency, and we know very soon we'll be there in the emergency. This is what we can do, different actions, and then early recovery actions that will contribute to food security and nutrition. All these actions interact because we are talking of different challenges at household or individual level that affect access, utilization, and availability of food. So whatever we are doing, we need to make sure we play around in those areas. In short, to manage time, I think this can be shared, and then we can see how we can interact with it and discuss as we go on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gilbert. Colleagues, if you have any questions to the presenters so far, please continue using the chat box. Before we move to another one, I already anticipate that we might be overshooting by, let's say, roughly 10 to 15 minutes. So colleagues, I hope to have your approval on that matter. Thank you so much. So we would now I would now invite David for our reactions on shelter. David, over to you for 5 minutes.
Unfortunately, I don't think David has been able to join because of different issues. So maybe we can just move on to the next and we can share these slides with everyone.
Sure, let's move to the next one. Okay, thank you, Phoebe. Now I would invite Peter for the sectoral anticipated reaction possibilities in the wash sector.
Okay, thank you so much. Maybe if you could move the slide down.
Oops, sorry, some bit of technical challenge. Let me just quickly reshare. Maybe you can just continue at the moment, Peter.
Okay, yeah, for WASH, basically, the risks that we foresee or the key concerns related to El Nino, one of them is damage to the existing WASH infrastructure. and this is likely to impact and lead to limited access to safe water, and this will mostly affect women, girls, and children. And also, the El Nino could bring about the issues of increase in displacement, and hence necessitating the need for emergency WASH response. There's also the risk of WASH-related diseases outbreaks. And based on past experiences, there could be cases of contamination of water sources with fecal matter. And also for areas which will experience drought, there is an aspect of drying of water points. So the key preparedness activities we are flagging out include, one, the issue of coordination. There's need for coordination among the WASH partners in country and the regional level. The aspect of mapping the areas are highly probable for to be affected. So this issue of getting to know which water points will be affected, possibly be affected, which communities, which institutions, and here we are thinking of institutional WASH in schools, WASH in health facilities, WASH in nutrition points. Key preparedness activities, issue of prepositioning of critical WASH NFIs, and this one has also to include water treatment products, storage facilities, hygiene kits, aspect of menstrual hygiene and management kits, issues of prepositioning soap. There's also need for training of WASH response teams. This could be refresher trainings, and which for the Red Cross, Red Crescent network, training at the branch levels. And the key areas we prioritize issues of hygiene promotion in emergencies, aspect of water treatment units. We have the Kit 5s, the Kit 2s, and even ERUs. Another preparedness activity is in regards to unblocking critical drainage channels. So drainage channels which are blocked maybe by solid waste and all this. This could apply in both, especially in context of urban WASH. Another key preparedness activity is early warning messaging, and this is disseminating critical information on what to do during if it's floods or drought, what to do during the phases, during, after, and before, and all this. For areas like South Sudan, there's issues of reinforcing river embankments ahead of the floods, and also in line with market-based programming, but this is context-based and based on the phases for each countries. There's a need to do and ensure we have in place pre-crisis rapid market assessments, which are affecting critical WASH markets. So there's need to factor these in. In terms of response activities, we have the distribution of WASH NFIs, which are coupled with hygiene promotion. There is the aspect of cash for WASH, and this one can consider CVA approaches based on the functionalities and accessibility to local markets. And the key message we are emphasizing on the consumption of treated water at household level and treatment of water at household level. There's also the key aspect of vector control, and here we are thinking of malaria and issues of drainage interventions. Aspect of emergency sanitation and WASH, maybe if we have the evacuation sites, the collective sites, issues to do with water tracking, water treatment. And in case we have outbreaks of cholera and other public health outbreaks, there's need to factor in WASH in public health and bringing also on board the issues of infection prevention and in terms of recovery activities, we are also thinking of rehabilitation of damaged WASH facilities. We also have, for the Red Cross, we have the ERUs. We are thinking of maybe to also think of deployments of ERUs, such as the water supply and rehabilitation ERUs, and also more emphasis on integrated WASH in schools, institutional WASH, aspect of having after action reviews, And then in the long term, we want also to take these experiences and see how they feed well to long-term initiatives such as water at the heart of climate change, one wash, resource mobilization, and this, yeah. So, okay, thank you. That's it from my side.
Thank you, Peter. That's highly appreciated. We continue with the sectoral impacts and anticipated action. And moving further, I would now invite Luca for some inspiration on the health sector. Over to you, Luca.
Thank you very much. Thank you. This is Luca, Emergency Health from Nairobi. So, well, when we talk about El Nino, as we have heard, the two possible options that we would like here see are floods and drought, depending by the different areas affected. And the projected health impact of floods would be, I've listed four that for areas of projected impact, health impact that we may observe, obviously wounds or injuries in case, for example, of flash floods. Obviously, as it was mentioned earlier, waterborne diseases or cholera in the worst case scenario, and then vector-borne diseases such as malaria, but also dengue. And then obviously depending by the entity of the flood, we may have also possible disruption of the continuity of care of health facilities. We have seen it, for example, in Malawi, because very simply the health facilities are damaged by the floods, by the water, by surface water, or by the winds that are associated sometimes with heavy floods. Whereas when we have a more slow onset emergency associated with El Nino, which is associated instead with drought, then what we may observe is an increase of malnutrition. We may observe also an increase of cholera or acute watery diarrhea. In this case, not so much because of the contamination of drinking water by, for example, the sludge, the fecal sludge that was mentioned earlier, but in this case, because of usage of highly contaminated water because of poor access to safe sources of water. And this was the case, for example, again in Malawi, where the cholera outbreak started during the dry season. And then we may observe, and it is common, also outbreaks of vaccine-preventable diseases, such as particularly measles, again associated with poor hygiene and low access to water. Now, when we talk about health and anticipatory actions, what is a little bit challenging is identifying the different triggers for the different diseases, and for which it's important to understand when, at which point we want to act. Do we want to act with one case, or we want to maybe embed, for example, different activities with team that is working on cholera about possible different, so we trigger with that may be activated when there are cases, for example, in a neighboring area, in a neighboring district. You may have, for example, say cases of cholera, or an increase of cases of malaria, for example, and therefore you activate, for example, for cholera, this is a good example, active surveillance in addition to the preparedness activities. Or this you may do it also in case of early warning, which could be, for example, the presence of heavy rains or flooded areas. And then you may have, and this you can see in the chart below. You have early warning, and you have that your trigger one, and you have activities that get launched, activated. In trigger two, maybe it occurs, for example, when a case of the disease is identified. It can be cases of cholera. And when the epidemic, maybe it's extremely small, you just have one case or two cases, and you want to make sure that the outbreak doesn't go out of control. And in this case, you would activate early response mechanism and start the epidemic to contain it and prevent it from becoming a crisis. So this would be integrated with the preparedness mechanism, which would still continue. And then, of course, if these actions, these anticipatory actions are not able to control the outbreak, then it's evident at that point you will need to go into a response phase. Next slide, we will look a little bit about which are the possible readiness activities. So we have them across 3 different areas of engagement, programmatic areas, trainings, repositioning, and then system readiness. So on trainings, I've listed some of the key ones. So CBHFA or first aid or psychological first aid. These would be obviously training we would want to make sure the volunteers have been exposed to, particularly looking at the risk of wounds and injuries and for the continuity of care. Whereas when it comes to cholera, there are other specific trainings that can be implemented. For example, the BORT, the one that was previously called the BITIT, which is basically the intervention, the rapid intervention team for cholera, the ORP management, the oral radiation points. So whereas the BORT in a way interrupt the chain of transmission at community level, just to explain the purpose of it, the ORP instead they reduce the mortality rate at community level by being able to treat the mild cases in the community or stabilize the most critical one. Then you may have EPIC, we can work for cholera, IWD, malaria, dengue, vector-borne diseases, measles, and vaccine preventable diseases. And then you have malnutrition promotion, such as malnutrition screening, and IYCF, which is not only for nutrition, for addressing the risk of malnutrition, but also for cholera. This is something we always recommend to include IYCF in the prevention, in the preparedness and in the response to cholera outbreak, because exclusive breastfeeding is a very good way to reduce the risk of cholera in very small infants, which it's very often little when they are infected. The prepositioning, and this is something that also Stella mentioned earlier about the importance of working on prepositioning and on custom clearance for example, BORT equipments, the ones I mentioned earlier for sprayer, chlorine, ORP kits, first aid kits, development and printing of IC material. This is something also that if we want to be ready, we want to have already some tools. And then the system readiness, it can work, I'm sorry, in health there are plenty of acronyms, but community-based surveillance assessment or community-based surveillance implementation. So we want to check if a country or a context is ready for implementing community-based surveillance. We want to work, as was mentioned by Stella, on custom clearance, not only of the kits that have been mentioned earlier, but potentially also in case of severe health system consequences, such as impact on the continuity of health services, interagency health kits. These are big boxes of drugs and medical material that can be shipped in case, for example, for operationalizing mobile clinics, in case health facilities may be disrupted. Then we may want to understand which are the CEA and the CCE channels that may be identified, local radios, and so on. So there are CEA colleagues obviously working with the health ones. The referral pathway identification. So we want to engage with the Ministry of Health and other health actors, particularly when it comes to nutrition, if we want to be prepared for possible referral of children with some with severe acute malnutrition. We want to know which are the nutrition actors, so that if there is a surge in and there is an increase in incidence of malnutrition, we want to be able to identify. And then finally, the identification of triggered activities, such as active case finding, public health teams activation, SCC messages, and deployment of preposition equipment. So these are the readiness activities for health. Obviously, it's a lot, but
Can we make it very quick, keeping in interest of time? Sorry.
Sure, I'm done.
You're done. Thank you, Luca. Thank you so much. Colleagues, before I hand it over to Phoebe to continue, let me quickly tell you, like, there's quite a lot of resources in the anticipation hub webpage regarding possible reactions on different hazards and different impacts by country. So I would request colleagues to make best use of that resource. I know every context is unique, but I'm sure that will definitely provide us some ideas, illustration, and inspiration, and help us in terms of planning early actions for different sectors in different contexts. So having said that, I would now hand it over to Phoebe to take it further. Over to you, Phoebe.
Thank you so much, Damoda. I think that was great, serving of buffet of different anticipatory actions that can be taken by our national societies as they prepare for, the risks as well as the opportunities related to El Nino. I'll ask McLaren to please mute. Thank you. For the next session, we have talked about all these activities that you can do, but somebody can ask, okay, going back to what Fao said, where is the flexible? And I just want to use the same exact words that Cyril actually used. Where is the flexible and advanced funding to support us to be able to do these activities, anticipatory action activities related to the El Nino? And I want to hand over to my colleagues, Ediag, to take us through the last part of actually this webinar, where we'll be talking about funding to support preparedness activities. So Adrian, if you can hear me, please take over. The stage is yours. Thank you. Maybe you can put the slides on presentation mode. Great. Super.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Phoebe. Good afternoon, colleagues. I will first pass the floor to my colleague, Chuck, to present us the funding tools, the modality existing in IFRC, just going through these anticipatory pillar before we go deep into the foresee possibility for imminent request to support through the draft. Over to you, Chuck.
Thanks, Adrian. So I'll just go to the next slide and present a little bit first what from the anticipatory action side of things, what is in place in Africa, what protocols are financed under the Disaster Relief Emergency Fund. So we have full early action protocols in the Red Cross movement, which have a lifespan of 5 years, and every EAP for every hazard, specifically they will go up to 500,000 Swiss francs, with a minimum requirement that it reaches 10,000 people once activated. So you can see here in yellow all the early action protocols, or just to make it interagency anticipatory action plans, we mean with that within the Red Cross movement, that are under development. So you can see specifically relevant to after having a presentation on the El Nino risk by Dagam earlier, that, for example, in Southern Africa, Namibia is still developing their drought EAP, Zambia as well. Zimbabwe actually activated their drought EAP. Green means ready to activate, and actually now it should be red because they are actually activating their EAP. Lesotho also has a drought EAP, and they've indicated that they're planning to activate also for El Nino drought. Madagascar, they're developing drought, but closely coordinating with the other agencies, WFP and FAO, that are ready to activate as well. And I think WFP, you've activated on Madagascar already. We see also Mozambique, a government-led now, which is the kind of unique first, I think in Southern Africa at least, a government-led anticipatory action drought plan. supported by WFP and Mozambique Red Cross, CVM will also adopt those triggers and see what the activation might look like. We see also Eswatini, they're developing their drought EAP. For Eastern Africa, we see floods in place for Uganda, which we've already heard, Kenya as well, floods, and Ethiopia as well. So we see there quite a bit of anticipatory action capacity as well. We have Niger drought and floods as well. So we have a little bit of an overview. If we can go to the next slide, also of simplified EAPs that you can see that we have in place in the region as well. So what stands out here maybe is that there was a question earlier for Comoros and specifically all the Indian Ocean islands, but Comoros has something in the pipeline for volcanic ash. So that's what we have. Burundi is working on floods as well. So we have where I take you through the different funding modalities and the scenarios and what is kind of like upcoming. So please tell me if I'm still audible, because I got please go to the previous slide. I got a message that my connection is unstable.
We can still hear you. We lost you for a few seconds, but you can hear you now. Please go ahead. I cannot hear you here on my end. Maybe Adrian, you want to take over because of time?
Yes, I can take over.
Okay, no, so
oh, okay.
Okay, go to the next slide, please. It seems to be skipping 2 at a time. Okay, thanks. So we have here kind of like existing readiness and recommendation actions for El Nino. And you see in this table from left to right, you see the scenario for anticipatory action, the conditions, can it be activated, concerned national society with highest impact, and then recommended actions. So first scenario is EAP is approved. So there's an EAP in place. Consideration should be, is there sufficient readiness activities that are carried out under that EAP design? Threshold for early action corresponds to the current forecast, so the trigger is reached. Can it then be activated? Yes. So those are big major elements that you still need to consider once you have an EAP in place. So these concerned national societies that have that is Niger for floods, Ethiopia for floods, Nigeria, Djibouti, Zimbabwe, and Kenya. I think we have a couple of more, including Uganda, that was mentioned before. Here, the recommendation: ensure readiness and prepositioning under the EAP is done. Monitor closely the trigger and activate the EAP as soon as the trigger is reached. So we see Zimbabwe and Lesotho, in fact, that they triggered already for in line with the El Nino. You see EAP approved scenario number 2. EAP trigger will likely not be met, or insufficient readiness or prepositioning is done to enable early actions, or the risk for El Nino is for a different hazard. So then you won't activate. The actions that you might be taking is mapping of existing readiness and prepositioning under the EAP. How can that be used or utilized for different activities and then replenish, for example? Still try to monitor the trigger in case it might be reached. Define feasible early actions. So consider if the national society has the capacity to implement in time before a disaster happens. Identify triggers for potential imminent drought. So you can apply for an imminent drought if the trigger of the full EAP is not reached, for example, and prepare this imminent drought. And Adrian might be able to tell you a little bit more about the imminent drought modality in the later slides. And then we have EAP is still under development. So then you know that for sure you won't have the pre-positioning done under the EAP itself, and you won't have readiness activities done. So then you can't activate an EAP. So a couple of examples there now also, Namibia for drought, Zambia for drought, Madagascar for drought. But an example for Madagascar and Mozambique is that there is close coordination with other actors in country. Mozambique specifically, they're coordinating with the different other actors in country and now government-led drought protocol. So here you can see a good example of how coordination is still possible in the past. Also in Mozambique, for example, for floods and for cyclones, when you have an active partner national society with, for example, a contingency fund in place and the experience of the national society that already has triggered, you can potentially rely on some of contingency funds of partners in country and still assist in early actions. Then we can go to the next slide. Also there, the imminent draft is a very valuable modality to go for, of course. Then you have some scenarios where in-country support for anticipatory action is there, for example, under PPP flexible budget, or other partner support. So again, there the contingency fund is might be relevant, and you can look at smaller scale activations, like budgeted if you had a budget for a simulation exercise, for example. So also here, coordination with in-country partners is essential. And then there is no limit or limited identified country support or no anticipatory action plan. Here you can look, for example, for a imminent draft again, with the support of the IFRC in drafting and making sure that that weather forecast and country forecast and outlook assessment is done correctly. Then you have, if there's ongoing imminent or response draft operations, where you at least still have 3 to 4 months extension period possible, then you can activate for anticipatory action or for early actions. Some examples here is Niger and Mozambique. But for example, here you really need to focus on mapping of El Nino risk and at-risk areas, if linked to existing target, or request an update to include the El Nino risk if it's out of the current target area. Then the last scenario, ongoing early actions for floods or drought is our ongoing operations are ongoing. Here you identify the feasibility in areas and gaps that are possible under the appeal. With that, I will hand over to Adrian to take us through the next part. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dirk. So we have been covering the different scenario that we are expecting in terms of capacity to support through the anticipatory action modalities of IFRC, the different national societies that are likely to be impacted by El Nino. So in the anticipatory action pillars of the draft, we have the full EAP, which is existing, that have been listed by Jerk, with the different conditions and consideration that are included in the EAPs. So for some of the national societies, we have mentioned that they can already trigger their different EAPs, both the full EAP and the simplified EAPs, and be able to implement some early actions when the trigger of the possible impact of El Nino will be met. So aside of that, we have a third modality under the anticipatory action pillar, which is the imminent draft. So it is likely that some of the national societies with different impact that are foreseen for El Nino from October up to up to first quarter of 2024 will likely face either floods or drought or both in a successive timeline. So for those national society, and when they are matching the consideration of limited support in country or no EAPs in place, through the IFRC support modalities, we have also the imminent draft, which has some considerations that needed to be highlighted. And one of the first consideration is regarding the timeline that you need to monitor. So for an imminent draft, if the foresee risk or impact will be a sudden onset, then you need to have your operation being processed and approved through the existing mechanism 1 month before the trigger. And if it is a slow onset, which is in this case mainly referring to the drought impact of El Nino in the southern part of the region, then you have up to 4 months before the event to activate an imminent draft. But as you have recalled from the different presentations from our colleagues, we have some partner support already ongoing for several of these countries. And we also have some of the countries that are covered through the Africa Hunger Crisis Emergency Appeal, where we can already include some coordination of mapping of this risk of El Nino and how it will impact the ongoing planning in the different countries. But we also have side effect of El Nino in different sectors which are not properly linked or directly linked to the FSL. Then you need to also have consideration of the different sectors that might be impacted and see how the anticipatory pillar of the draft through the imminent draft tool can complement the existing anticipatory action in these countries. So one thing to take into consideration, even under the anticipatory action, we still work on the existing feasibility, eligibility criteria of the draft as a tool. So be aware of the situation of the different national society. We kindly request all the support from all the different stakeholders involved in processing the planning to clear the pending requirements. And we also have to highlight some consideration on the specific eligibility activities that might be considered under the draft. And for that, it is important, first of all, to highlight from all the presentation that has been made in the different sectors, please consider that under the imminent draft, the readiness activities will all be linked to the activation of your yearly actions. So all the readiness activities and the prepositioning that you might include in your planning under the anticipatory action pillar of the draft should be made to ease the delivery of the yearly action. So the broader preparedness and readiness of the national society will likely not be eligible in the planning. So two possible scenarios foresee in this in the launch of the draft for imminent. You might have already evidence of the hazard that is likely to impact the communities, which means you can already see in this case the water level increase for the rivers or the impact on the drought season or consideration of above average millimeters rainfall in the provision that you are receiving. then in that case, you need to have appropriate forecasts that you will analyze. And this does not include the seasonal forecast. So in this case, you will need to have an information which is closer to the trigger, which already demonstrate that the hazard is already happening. And the second scenario is when the hazard hasn't started yet. So in this case, the imminent drift, we can foresee that there will be humanitarian consequences, but we need some verification sources of the impact analysis and the prevision that the forecast that you may have at country level. To notice and highlight, there have been several information on the impact of El Nino, both at global and regional level, but this is not sufficient to trigger an imminent drift. So you will still need to work closely with in-country stakeholders to be able to issue appropriate and triangulated prevision to document an anticipatory action plan under the drift modalities. So in terms of activities, I will quickly, I know some of the colleagues have already covered it. So activities are always divided into 3 types of activities. You will have the readiness activities, so all the activities that you are doing in the national society and with the different partners to be able to easily deliver your yearly actions, and at community level for them to understand this yearly action and to take that engagement that is necessary for success of the different yearly actions. And the second category will be the stock acquisition, which is usually called the prepositioning, that will cover the different sectors that are likely to be impacted. And in this specific category, I will call this stock acquisition the mitigation stock. So make sure that you are looking into stocks that can mitigate the impact that is foreseen in the different sectors, and also that are able to be procured and also delivered to the communities in the lead time that your forecasts are given to you. And the last part, which is the basics of the anticipatory action, is the yearly action activities. In that category, you will then have all the activities that you activated when your trigger is met. And this is important to highlight that the monitoring of the triggers and the monitoring of the different thresholds that you set in your planning will really contribute on the success of your yearly action activities. And the capacity of the national society, as well as the existing readiness, also play a key role on the possibility to activate and complete the different yearly action activities. So the early warning, the different communication, the coordination, the monitoring, and the different sectoral yearly actions are likely to be successful if you consider the lead time, the capacity of the national society, and the existing other anticipatory action coordinated with the different stakeholders in country.
Thank you. I think I will stop at that, Adrian, because we are so much way beyond time. We will share all these presentations. Sorry to have to stop you, but we're really way behind, beyond the time we had even requested. I see there are some questions that are coming on the chat box. If you can help us in terms of responding to that, I think that would be great. But thank you so much for your presentation. Colleagues, we will share all these presentations with you, and you'll be able to actually have a go through at that. And just to say that I'm looking at Paul's comment. I would suggest that you please reach out to Adrian and the anticipatory action colleagues so that you can have a discussion on how we can support the National Society to have these fundings to support them to be able to engage in activities that would take will make our communities be able to, of course, be able to anticipate, to be safe and resilient from the risk, but also take advantage of the opportunities at that. So thank you so much, Yag and Adrian, for that presentation. Allow us to come to the conclusion of this particular webinar. I just want to say, as part of my highlight for me is with the information that you've been able to gain today, please plan with that information and support our communities to be safe and resilient, but also to be able to, not just talk and talk and talk and talk, but be able to take action that is very well needed. I believe we have been inspired, we have been challenged with what other people are already doing, with what our partners are already doing, but also we have been able to be provided with the necessary tools that we need to be able to take action. I just want to say thank you to all of you for making the time and actually having to stay an additional 20 minutes beyond the scheduled time. Thank you so much for finding the time to join this particular webinar. Thank you to all the presenters who are able to make their presentation today. Thank you to our interpretation team for the great work that you've been able to do. And also I want to thank my co-moderator, Damuda, for the excellent work that you've been able to do. I will share all the presentations, and also the recording of this particular session will be shared with all of us for us to be able to listen to it again, to be able for us to go through the presentations once again, and also all the contact details of the presenters, including, Adrienne, who was just about to finish her presentation, but I rudely interrupted, so that you can be able to engage with all of us. Thank you so much, colleagues. I wish you a very good rest of the evening, and looking forward to all of you taking action and helping our communities to be safe and resilient. Thank you, and bye-bye. Have a good rest of the evening. Thank you, colleagues, for making this happen.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.